Hello and welcome to Bastionland Broadcasting, where tonight we are looking at Mythic Bastionland, which is currently on Kickstarter. Is this the first stream I've done since it went live on Kickstarter? Feels like it could be. And if that is the case, obviously a big thank you to everyone who's backed it so far. If you are just watching this and you don't know what Mythic Bastionland is, there should be a link in the description to the Kickstarter. And today we're going to be looking through the sort of the GM side of things. I've previously done a video looking through, like running through an example of combat. I've previously done one looking through how to prep for a game and how to do character creation. But this one is kind of the nitty gritty of you're actually sat at the table and you're running the game. Like, what does that actually look like? Because as cool as like character creation can be, and, you know, combat in this game does have a bit more of a focus, those things aren't really the core of the game for me. And we'll get onto that as we go in. But let's have a quick look. So we're going to be using the quick start rules that are still out there for free and will remain free even when the campaign is finished. They might get a little update. But these have everything you need to play, everything you need to run the game. And for the purposes of this, I'm using a website called albert.rodeo, which it has lots of features that I'm not using, but essentially I just needed something that had a map and a way to move a little thing around on the map, because this is kind of, for me, this is kind of where the game of Mythic Bastionland kind of generally happens. It is the hex map, because it is a game focused primarily around hex crawling. Now, you will zoom in for like social encounters and combat encounters, and you know, you will kind of zoom out a little bit when you do the passage of time as well. But whenever I play the game, I always have the hex map in the middle of the table. And we have done a video before talking about how you prepare one of these hex maps. There's a procedure in the book for doing so. But now I wanted to look at how you actually run it. So, a couple of things. First of all, the players would not get to see all of this stuff that's on the map. This is a map that I actually prepared for a game I ran a couple of weeks ago. And this is the player-facing map that I gave them. So the player-facing map here is just the general sense of the terrain. I actually didn't include the holdings on this map, which I normally would put the holdings on the player-facing map because it feels like it makes sense. But for this one, it sort of ended up as a happy accident, really, because I just exported it without the holdings by mistake. And then I thought, well, how about if the knights are arriving in this realm and they really don't know where the holdings are? Perhaps they have like a very old, very vague map of the realm. So the players will have this. But for the purposes of today, we're going to be looking at the map that has all of the details on. So the landmarks, the holdings, the myths, what's the word that I'm trying to describe for these things? The barriers. It's been a long couple of weeks. All this stuff the players will not necessarily have, but we're looking at it from the GM side today. So what we're going to do is we're going to run the game. Bear with me. It would help if I could speak, wouldn't it? So what we're going to do is we're going to run through it at a sort of high level of what the structure of the game looks like. We're not going to go into specific combat encounters. We're not going to worry too much about like individual gear of the characters. We're just going to go through a general structure of what the game looks like when I run it. And in true to form, I've not really prepared that much. These are all of my notes for the entire realm. They fit on an A4 piece of paper, so that's 4 holdings, I think 24 landmarks, and the myths, which are obviously detailed in the book. So what we're going to do is we're going to say that the knights are represented by this shield. This represents their company. And for the purposes of this demo, we've got 2 knights here that I've just kind of rolled up very quickly. The True Knight and the Snare Knight. But we don't need to worry too much about their specific details just yet. So what we have with Mythic Bastionland is there is a procedure in the game for hex crawling which is very straightforward and very kind of quick and simple. But it kind of got me thinking about the game and how I would sort of teach the game to someone who wanted to run it. And the main thing I think that I really want to get across here is, although the game has saving throws, it could be easy to think that those saving throws are kind of the core mechanic of the system, and they're not. And likewise, the game has this combat system, and you might think, well, that's the sort of core of the system, and it's not. If you go to the refereeing section, this page here, but especially this action procedure, when you're running the game, this is your best friend here. This 5-point list. And I'll only give this caveat once because it's really important. I can only talk about how I run games, okay? And I appreciate that I'm trying to make a game for other people to run. But it's written in a way that would appeal to me, and I can only talk about the way that I run games. So I'm not saying this is the only way to run Mythic Bastionland. I'm not saying this is the best way to run RPGs as a whole. This is just what I do. And I've found this 5-point list to be really useful. Essentially, no matter what the players ask you to do, if they're taking action, you just work down this list. And we'll come back to this with some examples. But this is as close as you can get to the core mechanic of Mythic Bastionland. Don't worry about saves, don't worry about attack rolls. All that stuff is important, but this is the absolute key. Because this tells you when you actually use those tools, and it tells you what to do when you don't need to use those tools. So this is kind of the core of the game for me. Now I've gone onto my high horse a bit there, so let's get down to earth and do some travel. So let's say the knights have arrived in the realm by sea. Let's say they've arrived in here, and it's morning. And the time does matter in this game because there's 3 phases of the day, and in each phase you can generally travel a number of hexes depending on how you're traveling. At the moment, the knights have arrived. I might describe the scene as they arrive. In doing so, you might notice they're entering an empty hex. So what do we do when they enter an empty hex? Because this isn't one of those games where you stock every single hex with a little bit of box text. So what happens when you enter an empty hex? Well, we've got you covered there. Go to refereeing. When faced with a question not answered by rules, notes, or procedures, you improvise. Anything too beneficial or too harmful creates the feeling of an arbitrary world. Instead, describe something that does at least one of the following: evokes the flavour and themes of the area, indulges in their senses, or reinforces something they've already learned about this place. So we've arrived in a blank hex. We know that it's sort of grassland, I guess, from the texture here. We know that it's coastal, and we know that there is a holding that would probably be visible from like a vantage point, because you can generally see into the neighbouring hexes and get a general sense of what's there, but not any sort of detail. So when we're improvising, these are our 3 options. Now I'm gonna go slightly out of order, but we can't really reinforce something they've already learned about this place because they don't know anything about this place yet. Evoking the flavour and theme of the area, we still don't know anything about this area yet, or this realm. We might have prepared sort of a general sense of like some big things that are happening in the realm. We might have an idea of like some themes we wanted to capture in the realm, but we don't have any of that at the minute. So instead, we're going to indulge their senses. And remember this rule about you're not going to improvise anything too beneficial or too harmful. So if you say you arrive in this empty hex, you wouldn't describe it as an empty hex, but say they arrive in these grasslands, you wouldn't want to say you get there and all of a sudden you're immediately like beset by bandits or whatever, because that's kind of a bit too harmful for something that wasn't already prepared. It feels a little bit arbitrary. And likewise, you wouldn't want to say that you get there and you immediately find, heaps of gold. These are extreme examples, but hopefully you get where I'm coming from here. And the players won't always know that that was unplanned, but I find it does kind of create a bit of a feeling at the table if you're doing that. So it is best to sort of create something that's in that kind of middle ground. And as we talked about during the prep, one of your best tools for doing this is the spark table. So even if in these grasslands we just decided, you know what, we know it's these rolling grassy hills, we're just going to talk about the sky and the weather. So I rolled 11 and 9. So we have bright rays. So we can say like there are bright rays of light shining down from above. And the weather is harsh sunlight is what I got. So you can say it's almost like dazzling, these lights coming down as you sort of ride over these grassy hills. And, it's not the most evocative thing in the world, but hopefully it sort of indulges their senses enough that they start to feel a little bit like they're there. So we've arrived here. And like I said, we've got three phases of the day, and we are going to be traveling in each of them. So for the purposes of this example, I'm going to say that we've been warned away from going to this holding. The one bit of information we have perhaps upon arriving here is that we should stay away from there for now. Mainly as a giant contrivance because I don't want them to go there first. Instead, they're going to be, new knights arriving in the realm. It would be kind of common to go and look for either a seer or perhaps a holding where you can find some information about what's happening. Because remember, if the knights ever find themselves without direction, you point to this. You point to their oath. To seek the myths, honour the seers, and protect the realm. And generally, in very sort of practical terms, that means looking for the hexes where myths are happening. It means looking for sanctum landmarks, which is where seers live. And this probably means going and finding whoever's in charge here at the realm, or finding people in the realm and talking to them to find out how they need protecting. So even if it looks like they've got nothing to do when they get in the realm, you've got a job to do here. You're not just adventurers. You're not just going around treasure hunting or something. You are knights that have taken an oath to do quite a specific kind of role within this society. So we're gonna do some actual moving because I've been rabbiting on for a while. Let's say our players have decided, you know what, we've been warned to stay away from here. We're going to go towards this holding that we've heard is further up north. And remember that the players don't know where these landmarks and these barriers are. So, the way that you can travel, you have 3 options. You can travel 1 hex on foot or on steed, which is just trekking. You can gallop 2 hexes if you're on a steed that's not exhausted, but your steed is going to lose some vigor to do that, which is generally not great. Or if you're on a boat, you can go 3 hexes. So we're not on a boat, and we don't want to completely tire out our steeds needlessly. So we're just going to hike, which is kind of the most common form of transport, and that means we're going to travel to here. And that will take the entire of the morning phase to get there. And then what do we do? When they have finished moving at the end of the phase, the wilderness roll is one of the most frequent rolls you'll be making as you travel around. It's very similar to a random encounter roll, I guess, if you're coming from D&D. And it's just a straight d6 roll, which I'm going to do with physical dice here. And I rolled a 4. Now, if you roll a 4, if the hex has a landmark, it means that they encounter it. Does this hex have a landmark? No, it's another empty grassy hex. So if there's no landmark, it's all clear. And what does all clear mean? Sometimes you can just say it's all clear and now it's the afternoon. Where do you want to go next? But like I said, I do like to sort of improvise a little bit. So perhaps we will go back to these spark tables. And we'll talk about because we're sort of riding along the coast here, aren't we? So I might roll on the spark tables for the water. And I got 9 and 11, which is Verdigris Spray. Verdigris Spray was the name of my 4th album in my band when I was a teenager. So verdigris spray, we could describe this sort of verdigris it's a great word to use, but it's quite a difficult one to conjure up sometimes. So I guess you got this kind of turquoise, coppery spray, sort of as the sea is kind of smashing up against these cliffs that we're riding along, and it's this kind of bright turquoise verdigris coloured spray, sort of coming over us as we ride across the grass. And maybe we'll put a feature in this hex, because it doesn't have to be a landmark. We could just say that we ride past something that looks interesting. So I got 11 and 2, which is a desecrated seat. So perhaps one of the things we ride past is this kind of huge stone, almost like throne, that looks like it's been sort of smashed into rubble almost, and perhaps it's even been kind of like marked with like chalk as we ride past it. And it might be something that the players want to go and investigate, and if they do, I would kind of gently suggest that this is just a little bit of flavour, but it's nice to just have it there so the world feels kind of lived in. And my favourite one, I will always roll weather, because I feel like if there's one thing that really helps give this sense of like travelling through nature, for me it is constantly changing weather. And it's not a complex weather system here, it's just a straight 2d12 roll. I get 12 and 3, which is harsh cloud. So we had harsh sunlight before, so perhaps the clouds are starting to come over now. So the sort of the bright light is sort of replaced by this sort of sudden, not quite darkness, but certainly this sort of low shade that sort of comes over in the afternoon, as we're sort of getting washed over by this spray from the sea. So there you go. So that's a good example of what happens when nothing happens. It is now the afternoon, so we can travel again. So they're gonna follow the coast. And if they said here, like, what can we see? The guidance in the book. Let's find it. Guidance in the book is kind of that you can see a general sense of what's there. Here we go, vision. From a vantage point, it's possible to get an overview of the current hex and a general sense of what lies in its neighbouring hexes, but not specific details. So the way I interpret that is that as we're riding, perhaps when we sort of reach a sort of the crest of a hill, we will see that this holding is here, so that we know it's here, but all we can sort of make out is that there is some sort of structure over there. We can't make out any further details. And likewise here, we can just see that the rolling green sort of grasslands sort of turn into sort of more rugged hills as we go forward. So we're going to ride through here to the afternoon, and we're going to roll another d6. And this time I got a 3. And this was for our wilderness roll, I should say. So the wilderness roll, if you get 2 or 3, you encounter the next omen from the nearest myth. And this is kind of the meat of the weird stuff you're going to get on your travels. So on this map, our myths are these hexes with the little number at the bottom. So we have myth number 4, myth number 3, and there's 6 in total, and they're kind of scattered around the realm. But our nearest hex here is myth 4, because that's 2 hexes away. I can see there's lots of questions coming in, by the way, in the chat. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to them when I get a little moment, rather than sort of constantly stopping. So our nearest myth is myth number 4, which we're going to, for the sake of simplicity here, we're just going to use the 4th myth in the game. But you would choose, you could select any of the myths to be in your realm. And there's going to be 72 in total. There's 12 in the quick start, So there's going to be enough that you can sort of handpick 6 that kind of fit what you had in mind for your realm, or you can roll them at random. So, omens. We've encountered an omen from the river. And omens are generally encounters. Sometimes they're just weird things, but they are encounters that will always occur in this order. So we will always encounter omen 1 from the river before we encounter omen 2 from the river, before we encounter omen 3. But the order is random, because there's going to be 6 myths, and we could encounter we can encounter an omen from any myth at any time, but we're more likely to encounter those from our nearest myth. So you don't have sort of just a straight like working your way down the list. You sort of jump from one myth to another, and that kind of makes things nice and messy. So our omen here. 6 monks appeasing the river with offerings of bread. Their apparent leader is annoyingly vivacious and optimistic about their work tending to the river. And we have these river monks here if we need them. Now, like I say, I'm not going to go into how to actually run the encounter. But one of the things here, and one of the things that I'm glad I got to talk about the river, is the myths. The general rule is that the realm will bend to the myths, because this is a world of myth, not a world of history, and the myths are going to happen, essentially, is like one of the foundations of this setting. And if the river needs to happen, the river is going to happen, even if you prepare a desert realm, you know what I mean? So we have no river on our map, but we know now that we have crossed the river in sort of riding up here. So we would describe this encounter, the knights would deal with it. The low numbered omens tend to not be like super hostile immediately. So let's just say that they have had this encounter and they have resolved it without any sort of major event. So that was afternoon. So it is now evening. No, it is now night, I should say. So night is interesting because there are a few things to consider. So if we go back to the travel page, there are a few things that come into effect at night. So traveling at night means that you're traveling blind, which means you have to roll on this table when you travel, which means there's like a 50% chance that you're going to go off course somehow. Also, if you travel all day and don't get a proper rest for at least one phase, you're going to lose some clarity. And where's the other one? Yeah, if you're traveling at night, you're going to lose D6 spirit each as you're sort of traveling through the night. So essentially, it's just a really bad idea to travel at night. Night is the perfect time to sleep. And that sounds like very basic advice. And I didn't want to say that you couldn't travel at night. And I didn't want to make traveling at night like super bad. So you can do it. But it's generally a bad idea. So in this case, we assume that knights are going to set up camp around here and camp out for the night. Now, when you're in somewhere safe, like a proper indoor bed, you don't need to roll a wilderness roll at the end of the phase, but we do have to do it when we're camping. So we can roll for one of these, and we've got a 1. And a 1 means we encounter the next omen from a random myth in this realm. So, like I said, there are 6 myths in the realm. We've already encountered one from myth number 4, which is the river. But we've got some other ones here. We've got, well, I'm not going to find all the numbers, but we've got 1 through to 6 are all scattered around out here. So I'll roll, and I got myth number 1, which is actually located... Where is myth number 1? This is the... There we go. So myth number 1 is all the way over here on the other side of the realm, but you can still encounter omens from that myth. You're just less likely to do so. So we've encountered a myth, an omen from myth number 1. So let's go and find it. And this is happening at night, remember. And that is important. So this is the dead. No, not the dead. This is the plague, sorry. An old coot proclaims their dreams, where foul air was choking people in their sleep, pleads for help spreading the word. Now, when an omen happens at night, the referee is given a choice. If the omen doesn't make sense to happen at night, then you can just say it's all clear instead. So you are less likely to get something happening at night. But if it would happen at night, then it does happen. And if it would disturb their sleep, significantly, then the knights will still lose, I think it's clarity, as a result of not having a proper phase of rest in the day. So here, I think this old coot going around like shouting about their dreams, I think this could happen at night. This would be like a really quite scary thing to happen at night, is to have this sort of this old guy, you know, coming up to the camp and kind of interrupting the nights and talking about these dreams. So I think unless the knights are able to sort of calm this guy down sort of readily, I think we'll say that this will disturb their sleep, which means they won't get to have a proper rest. So let's say we've gone through to the morning, and then we would look at this section where each morning all who did not get a proper sleep in the previous day lose D6 clarity. So that's everyone. They're all going to lose D6 clarity. So I'm going to roll separately. So the True Knight loses, the True Knight loses all 6 of their clarity. They are reduced to 0 clarity. Now we'll talk about what that means in a minute. The Snare Knight, they just lose 1. So they got very lucky there. But the True Knight is obviously, you know, not doing well without their sleep. So what does 0 clarity mean? Well, 0 clarity means you are exposed. So you are basically vulnerable to being damaged. So they want to get their clarity back ASAP. How do they do that? Clarity is restored either by consuming stimulant, which we don't have any stimulant, or by receiving guidance from a seer. So this might perhaps sort of spur the knights on to try and find a seer ASAP, because having 0 clarity is really quite bad. Okay, let's carry on. So it's morning, and they're in a bit of a bad way. I think they're probably gonna think that if they head to this holding, they can at least find out where the nearest seer is, because don't forget, all these landmarks, they're not on the map that the players have got. So the players, all they know is that they are in this hex. They don't know where the sanctum is. They probably don't know where the holding is, but I think holdings on the map you can do, certainly. Okay, so let's press on. It's the next day. What do we do at the start of the day? We roll for weather, because I'm a massive nerd. So 11 and 12 on weather. Abundant fog. So we've woken up and the fog is sort of rolling in. Forget about that nice clear sky that we had the day before. We're really struggling to now see any further. Now, I said before that this weather table is kind of straightforward and it doesn't really have any mechanical impact. But the thing with RPGs is everything can have mechanical impact if you want it to. So remember what I said about how you can generally see into the next hex? Well, I've just rolled abundant fog and I've told the players that there's thick fog rolling in. So I think it was perfectly reasonable for me to say, yeah, you can't see into these hexes now. I wouldn't go as far as to say like you're traveling blind, but I would say that like you perhaps can't see what's on the horizon in the next hex. And there's no rule that says that, but whenever I design these games, I do try to leave some space there for the referee to feel like this sort of comes naturally, almost. And if you don't do that, it's fine. If you don't roll on that weather table, it's not going to like break the game. And likewise, me interpreting fog this way, whereas you might interpret it differently, is not going to break the game either. So, they are going to travel. In fact, I'm going to do like a D6 roll. I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, they decide to travel this way. 4, 5, 6, they decide to travel this way. And this isn't a mechanic. This is just me trying to sort of simulate a random player here. So I think they're going to stick to the coast. Oh no, do they? 1, 2. No, because if they go this way, actually, they can get here more quickly, and because they don't know this is here. So let's say they're going to try and move that way. So what they've hit here is a barrier. So we would say that they ride this way in the morning and they hit this, let's say it's a huge ravine and it's just completely impassable. Maybe they can find a way to pass through by speaking to some locals at a later point. But at the moment, that is just... It was a dead end, essentially. So, as far as morning goes, they're going to stay here. So we'll make another wilderness roll. And we get number 3. So a 3 on the wilderness roll means we get the nearest myth, which is still myth number 4. Which is the river again. So we're struggling with this river, aren't we? A lost fisherman washed up on the riverbank. A mighty newt is sniffing around the shaken man. So is this this newt's going to drag this guy into the river? So the knights have a chance now to decide what they want to do. Do they want to fight off this mighty newt? Do they just let this guy get dragged away? However that works out, let's say for the sake of this demo that the snare knight takes a little bit of vigor damage as a result of this. So vigor is restored by sleeping. It's by receiving a phase of hospitality, basically. So if you go and spend the night inside a house and someone gives you a hot meal, that's hospitality, and that will recover your vigor. So we've got even more motivation now to get to that holding. So the knights have learned there's a barrier here. On the map, they can draw on a little barrier, and instead they're going to spend the afternoon traveling this way. So there is a landmark in this hex, but you don't always discover the landmark, and I'll explain why as we go. I rolled a 2, which means this is the wilderness roll, I should say. A 2 on the wilderness roll is another omen from the nearest myth, so we're going to get another omen from the river because we're right next to the river now, or at least the hex that is sort of the source of the river, so to speak. And as a result, we're not going to encounter this landmark. We're not going to find it. If we had received a tip-off from the locals that this was here, or if we started searching for the landmark and spent a bit of time looking for it, then we would find it. But when we're just traveling through, you might not encounter them at all because each hex is a huge area. It's like it takes like half the day to ride through. So you're not going to see everything that's in the hex on one ride through. So we got the next omen from the river, which is a rocky outcropping, a lone dead tree at its peak. 3 monks seek a blood offering for the river. They need an innocent animal or a sinful person. So this is more of a social encounter, I guess, and these monks are going to try and sort of make a case for their sacrifice. So we're not going to zoom in and do the encounter, but this is what the knights would encounter in the morning. No, wait, this was the afternoon. So they've travelled, because they hit the barrier and then they travelled this way instead in the afternoon. So this would be what they would encounter, and they wouldn't get to see this monument, which is actually a useful landmark to have. So now it's it's night again, and we're going to set up camp. And how does the camping go? This time we get 5, which means... So a 5 would mean all clear, but it also means you can encounter the hex's landmark. And again, we can look at this and we can think, well, does it make sense to encounter this at night? And to do that, I'm going to need to know what is this landmark. So in terms of the icons I've been using, I use this for a monument, and the monuments essentially let you restore your spirit, and they usually hint at something from the past of this realm. So all I've done for my prep for the landmarks is I've picked a few of these prompts. So you can see at the bottom of each myth page, you've got a prompt for each of the different types of landmark in the game. So I just picked a few of them and just wrote them down. That's all that I have. So this one down here, this is a monument. This is, it says it's a seer bone reliquary. So what I could do is I could say that there is some sort of light like burning in this, or like beacon shining from this monument if I wanted to. But to be honest, if it's a reliquary, it doesn't really make sense that it would be drawing attention to itself at night. So for this one, I'm going to say this is just all clear. They don't encounter the landmark, and they're going to have to come back if they want to actually find this reliquary that contains the bones of a seer. Now, maybe if they spoke to these monks in the encounter, the monks might have been able to tell them. If they asked about the contents of the hex, the monks might well know that there is this reliquary here. Likewise, if they spoke to a seer, even in a distant hex, the seer might be able to tell them about this if this is something they wanted to find. So it really depends on how much information you've gathered, because I want this... The two ways to sort of learn about the realm are by either exploring it or by talking to people. And they both kind of feed into each other. So it is morning. We've had a night's sleep, so we don't have to worry about any negative effects from that. And we are we're 3 hexes away from the holding. And I think the knights are getting impatient now. So what they're going to do is they've decided they're going to hike a single hex in the morning, and then they're going to try and gallop to get to here by nightfall. So they're going to travel... Which way are they going to go? Let's say they go this way, just because it lets us go into a myth hex. Now, when you enter the hex that contains a myth, you don't roll a wilderness roll at all. Instead, you always get the next omen from that myth. So if you're in the river's hex, you're going to get the next omen from the river. So let's do it. They travel in, and they're going to get the next omen from the river. So pilgrims arguing with a bridge knight chasing a toll. The knight knows one of the pilgrims has a coin from the city and will take it by force if necessary. So we've come across some kind of conflict here between a knight and the locals. Well, not locals, some pilgrims, sorry. And one of the other things that's in here, you do have these little spark tables. So if we wanted to have some riverboats going by along the river, we could always just roll on this little mini spark table here. But for now, I think we've got enough going on. So let's say we resolve that encounter without any actual harm. And then it is now afternoon, and they're going to try to gallop. And if they try to gallop this way, they would end up just hitting another barrier. But let's be generous and say they go this way, which means they travel 2 hexes, but each of their steeds are going to lose a bit of vigor. So I got a 3 and a 4. So the petulant steed is down to 7, and the tattered steed is down to 4. And if they hit 0 vigor this way, they are exhausted, which means they can't gallop anymore. So they arrive in this holding, and they've made it by nightfall. And because they are in sort of, they're behind the walls essentially, you don't need to make a wilderness roll because we're not in the wilderness anymore. And now that they're at this holding, they could speak to the ruler here. They could find out where the nearest seer is. We can see the nearest seer is over here, so maybe there's a boat. Otherwise, they've got a bit of a journey ahead of them. They can get some hospitality to restore their vigor. They might be able to look at getting better equipment, because the way that equipment works in this world is very fluid. Like there's not a price list in the book. There's just a list of stuff, and there's a sort of guidance in there for how trade and kind of ascertaining items would work. So that is the basics of how you actually run the game and how you run this kind of hexcrawl. And remember, the point of these myths is that eventually you will resolve them, usually by getting to the final omen and dealing with it. And that's how you gain glory, and that's how you sort of rise up through the ranks of being a knight. So I think that kind of gives a decent indicator of how this works. I'm going to have a quick look through the chat now, because I saw there were a few questions in there. Carol asks, if Electric has new weird vibes, then mythical is Arthurian/medieval. That's exactly it. Matt Riki says they are looking forward to the hex crawling. Oh, they're looking forward to this because they've done the hex crawling in the Fallen Marshes of Into the Odd. Yeah, so Into the Odd does have a Hexcrawl at the back. This is a much more kind of involved system. Whereas the Hexcrawl in Into the Odd is very much like designed to get you to interesting places. I wanted the Hexcrawl itself to be kind of interesting in its own. Micah Morse asks, is there somewhere I can see the previous videos mentioned? Yeah, so if you go to the youtube.com/Bastionland, and then go over to the live tab, there will be a number of the different videos I've done talking about Mythic Bastionland on there. Most of them are under the live section, which I know is really annoying, but it's not easy for me to move them over to the standard section, and I generally do them as live streams. Yeah, Illusory Sensorium points out that I've got 5 bullet points of advice instead of the usual 3. I know. It's my best years are behind me. That's plain to see. Temporary 67315 asks, presumably about the Knight's Oath. Does this include enforcing your liege's laws as a sheriff? Is there a king that everyone answers to? There's not like one king, because you're making your own realm, and it's implied that this is one of many realms. So you are dealing with essentially a ruler of probably what's like similar to like, I don't know. They could call themselves a king, or it could be like a duchy. But it's left very open, and it's very much implied that the ruler's sort of grip on the realm is quite loose. They don't have sort of necessarily complete control of the realm, because each of the other holdings is also held by somebody who has their own agendas and their own things going on. So in terms of whether protecting the realm carries over to protecting the ruler, that is something that the knights will have to wrestle with as it happens. And yeah, the seers are kind of more of the authority here, because honor the seers is one of your parts of your oath. So you might get a situation where a seer asks you to kill a local ruler, and like, is that something you should do, because is that honoring the seers, or is it protecting the realm? That's for the knights to decide. Does the wilderness roll happen at night before camping? It kind of happens like after, so there's no mechanic for setting up camp. It just happens because it's assumed that your knights are good at doing that. So whatever happens as a result of the wilderness roll is assumed to happen like in the middle of the night. Lona asks, does dire weather only happen in winter now? Not quite. So the dire weather system, basically, if you're traveling somewhere where, if you want your realm to have dire weather, or if you want to say, this half of the realm has really bad rain, or perhaps this half of the realm is like desert, so there's a chance of like dust storms. You can roll on this dire weather table at the start of each phase, which can make it like a real pain to actually travel around. It tends to sort of threaten this more than it actually happens, but it can add a little bit of tension to travel. And it's assumed that all realms have dire weather at winter, but some realms will have dire weather all of the time. And yeah, we didn't really talk about seasons, but winter makes everything more difficult. So it's kind of interesting playing at winter, because travel becomes much less of a thing. So it means that for winter, you kind of want to get somewhere where you want to be dealing with a lot of stuff in that area, rather than jumping all around the realm, because it can be very difficult. Philip Dudley says that I could put all of my live videos into a playlist for easier finding. You know what? I should do that. So that's top knowledge. Thank you very much. I will do that. Are there playable Dark Knights or enemies they fight? So the knights that are listed in the book, you'll choose a knight or roll a knight for each of your players. But then all of the unused knights can be the other knights of this world. So when you need a ruler for a holding or a ruler for a realm, generally that's a knight. So you can just roll a random knight and say, yeah, you arrive at this castle, and the gilded knight is the ruler of this castle. There are also just knights that are kind of mentioned in the myths, so they will be kind of maybe not always enemies, but there will be NPC knights that are specifically mentioned in some of the myths as well. I can see now Illusory Sensorium basically answered that question for me, but thank you very much for that. Zrebak says, what is the city? I couldn't possibly tell you. Hamfast Halfwit says, would running a knight alongside pre-existing Into the Odd Electric Bastionland characters break the game? There is a page in the full book in the Apocrypha section, which is kind of the GM guidance and example of play section. There is a page there that deals with having characters going one way or the other, either knight characters going to Electric Bastionland or Electric Bastionland characters coming over to Mythic Bastionland. And as a general rule, I would say there could be a bit of novelty to having like characters from two different worlds, but the knight characters, I think it could create some issues. I think you need to have players that are on board with that. Especially the Electric Bastionland character might feel like they're missing out on some stuff because the knights get so many more unique little things, like the feats and so on. So I think I wouldn't necessarily just immediately smash them together and expect it to work, but I think you could make it work as a little bit of a, as a sort of twist, or like a, maybe probably not for a one shot, but like for a special sort of session in a campaign. Considering Elden Ring is an inspiration, can your knights use magic? There's not like magic spells like you would get in like D&D or like in a video game, but a lot of the knights' abilities are kind of verging on magic, and it's more that there's magic in the world as well. So there's not like a sort of book of spells that you can learn from. Yeah, Illusory Sensorium again says that Cairn is a good source of this. Yeah, I think Cairn is so cheap as well. You can just get it like so cheap, like printed or on PDF. I think it's free on PDF even. If you don't own Cairn by Yochai Gal, you should have Cairn. Cairn is basically a hack of Into the Odd, sort of transplanted into like a more traditional fantasy setting, and I think it's a good source for this as well because it's got some random tables in it too. There's lots of random tables in this book. You don't need it, but I would always tell people to pick up Cairn. Eric Babin says, I want to buy Mythic Bastionland, but I don't want to support Kickstarter. What would you suggest is the best way to go about that? Yeah, you have two choices. So the late pledges are going to be through backer kit, like someone's mentioned. But as soon as the backer copies are out, it's just going to go on general sale anyway through Bastionland Press and hopefully through some other places. And if you buy it on Kickstarter, you aren't actually getting anything extra. There's no Kickstarter exclusive stretch goals. It's probably very bad business to do that, but I didn't want to like do the whole FOMO Kickstarter thing. I kind of just wanted to. I am essentially kind of. I don't want people to feel like if they don't back it on Kickstarter, that they're missing out on something huge. All you're missing out on is that the Kickstarter copy is going to go out first, and then once the Kickstarter copies have been distributed, I'm going to start taking general orders. But backer kit will go live shortly after the campaign finishes, so depending on how you feel about backer kit, you can just go on there and pledge afterwards. Zreback, when you asked about the city, I gave a slightly glib answer saying that I can't tell you what the city is. In the book, there is going to be a 2-page spread that is the city quest, which is kind of like this. It's these knights equivalent, I guess, of like the search for the Holy Grail, in that it's this ultimate quest that's kind of borderline impossible, and that's kind of the point. But it is not impossible, strictly speaking, but it is very difficult, and there is a lot of chance and fortune to whether you will even get a chance to go on the city quest. So it's both a setting element in that it's important to the knights that they're sort of striving to be seen worthy of going on the city quest to find the city. but it's also not something I would sort of take for granted that you're actually going to get a chance to do. Is there Arcana? Pablo asks. There's not Arcana in the sense of like that they're called that, like they are in Into the Odd. But there are like strange items in here that would kind of fit the same role as Arcana or Oddities. Magnus Ross says, can we replace the word dank in the land spark table? You know what? That word has given me so much trouble because I use it in the traditional sense here. Let me find it. I use it in the traditional sense here, meaning like, you know, somewhere that is damp and wet and kind of like sodden with water, which is a nice evocative word to use for land. And it's kind of this is kind of like a mirror here, this table. So dank is also kind of the opposite of dry. Now it was previously wet, but then you would hit situations where you had combinations like a wet lake, which is, you know, you're always going to get funny combinations no matter what you do. So dank, if you want to like hack it yourself and cross it out and change it to damp, that would probably work fine. But I thought dank was just a little bit more evocative for me. But I do appreciate that for some people it is inseparable from meme stuff. Hides His Eyes says, is the big twist that the city is not Bastion and in fact some other big special city? No, nobody ever suggested that the city was Bastion. If that's what you think, that's your vision of the city, and I couldn't possibly tell you whether that was the case. Yeah, moist is the other word that I've been through the whole thesaurus, okay, and I saw moist, and moist is even worse than dank. There's no way I'm having moist in that table at all. And Handfast Halfwit, we'll do this as the last question. Is Bastionland like a disc-shaped world, with Bastion proper being the spoke in the middle? If you want to know about like the specific geometry of the world of Bastionland, that is not something that I have an answer for yet, and it's not something that is needed yet, but it might be something that I need for the future. So I'll leave that there, and until next time, I guess I will say goodbye for now. But before I go, if you haven't yet backed Mythic Bastionland, it is still on Kickstarter for the next 9 days. You can find out more about it at bastionland.com. That's also got links to the Discord server where you can come to talk about the game. If you wanted to try the game out, the quick start version is still free. It's got everything that you need. And if you want to support these streams, you can go to patreon.com/Bastionland, and that will help out with those. And I think that's everything. So until next time, goodbye for now.